Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's show. Special one from my point of view, from a very personal perspective, because as a huge rugby fan, I'm extremely excited to have Ben Kay on the show. Ben is a bit of a rugby legend, but he's also more multi-dimensional than you would have thought. He's actually fairly unique in that, having been an international sporting legend, he's then pivoted to become a very, very highly regarded sports commentator, rugby commentator, but also co-founded an advertising agency called Pablo. So managed to pull off multiple feats already. Just in terms of the background of Ben's playing career, he played for England 62 times and was, of course, part of England's unique Rugby World Cup winning team in 2003. And Ben is 6'6". You can probably just about make that out from the shot there. And so he was an indomitable force and never far from the action. But of course, an interesting perspective today in terms of that pivot, which many people will be contemplating. And of course, you don't get through an elite rugby career without some ups and downs along the way. So we'll be understanding a bit more about Ben's motivations and successes, but also some of the things that weren't perfect along the way. So super thrilled to have you on, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. Good to see you, Richie.
Well, Ben, just as well, thank you so much for taking some time out to spend with us this morning. Like I said, it's been a bit of a weird week. Back into second lockdown. I hope everyone watching is feeling okay this week. Perhaps this show will give you a bit of a pep me up. I've been feeling a little bit low, given the circumstances, and I hope everyone is doing okay at the moment. But Ben, into the first question, tell us, how's the last couple of months been for you?
Obviously challenging. I think I'm very fortunate in that, there's plenty of rugby that started up from my broadcasting side as well. The challenge initially of the pandemic with the agency was obviously big, as it has been for everyone. But it's actually been, sounds wrong to say enjoyable, but the challenge has actually become quite satisfying in how you deal with it and how you adapt. And a lot of my life, I guess a lot of what we might talk about this morning has been that realization that the key to succeeding in anything really is your adaptability. And that's never been challenged more for everyone than it has now.
Ben, can you just to tell us a little bit more about that adaptability, perhaps some of those moments and how you were able to do that and how were you able to build resilience around it?
Well, I think, coming from a sports background, one of the things that we've tried to impart on the agency is that brutal acceptance, because at times, and certainly in sport, because sport is such a short time frame, and to move on, you have to do it very quickly or you're going to lose. A lot of the things that you thought were going to be the right answer, that you'd invested a lot in personally, a lot of time in, suddenly it becomes the realization that they're not the right path to take. And if you have egos in your team, that's sometimes very difficult, because you have to be able to say, that's not working, that wasn't good enough, and then move on very, very quickly. And I think we did that. I think our first few attempts, for example, at pitching, where we tried to do the same old style of pitching that we would be doing face to face over a Zoom or over a digital channel, just weren't working, and we weren't getting the same level of rapport with the clients. So we looked at how we were actually conducting pitches, for example, or chemistry meetings, and we said, look, it's a totally new scenario. What we were doing before was working, and we were very happy with our sort of success rate, but we've got to move on, and we've got to bin all that and come up with what's right for now. And we did that, and we've had a really successful last couple of months.
Yeah, from my perspective, actually having participated in a couple of the things that Pablo have done, it's not maybe crass to say it, but it looks like you're having a good crisis. Some of that is about making good decisions under pressure. So I suppose, when you're under pressure, what happens sort of physiologically and psychologically? How do you deal with the pressure of the moment?
I think that for me, and again, harping back to my sporting background, the biggest inhibitor for humans is the fear of what might happen, rather than actually living in the moment of what actually is happening. And as a my dips in form as a player came when I was worried about the mistakes that might be made rather than actually, as soon as you worry about mistakes, you don't do things or you hesitate and that opportunity goes, and you see it in any team that's playing when there's no pressure on them, they're flowing, people are hitting their lines perfectly, running onto balls. But as soon as there's that element of doubt in your mind, which is caused by the fear of what might happen, it all falls apart. And I think, that's the key for me is where you want to get to. You almost set off on that journey and you adapt it along the way. And, you work out what's right. You learn from mistakes. Most great sporting teams that have won World Cups or, the biggest title in their sport, they've also lost one first to realize how to do it. And that's the key for me, not being scared of making mistakes. And when I was playing, when I had a dip in form, it was actually because I was inhibited and thinking, is this on? Probably not. I won't. I'll do the safe option. But if you're always doing the safe option, you're never challenging the opposition. You become very easy to play against.
That's very resonant. The message of don't hesitate. You reminded me of a book which listeners or viewers might be interested in. Suzanne Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. But you sort of encapsulated that in a few very clear sentences. So it's actually a pretty tough gig for Richie and I today, because we've got to balance your rugby career, your commentary career, and your successful advertising career. But let's start a bit from the beginning. And tell us how did you climb up through the ranks of the rugby ladder?
I was lucky enough to be born around the corner from a rugby club or live around the corner from a rugby club. And very early on, I think my mum realised that there was plenty of energy in there and wanted to push me out of the house. So it's always been a big part of my life from I think I started playing at the age of 5. And, being big, obviously that helped. And enjoyed my rugby. So I think that was the key. I'd always really had a love for the sport. I guess from realizing that it was potentially a professional, an occupation that I could go into was probably around the games was going professional around 95. But before then, everyone knew it was going to go that way. And I played international rugby for schoolboys. I'd had a really bad knee injury at 16, which actually I had to deal with all the way through my career and really manage. I'd taken all the cartilage off the back of my patella. And so it always caused me problems all the way through. And I think right throughout my career, which is probably why Pablo happened from my point of view, was everyone was always telling me, you're never going to quite make it because of the knee. And even when I did make it, my second ever England game, I partially dislocated my kneecap, and that was me out for. And Dean Richards, the Leicester Tigers coach at the time, was told by the Leicester doctor he's not going to make it back from this. And that was when I was 23, and I ended up playing till I was 34, or 24, I think it was. So I had another 10 years after that. So I think that was what was in my mind all the way through. I was always thinking, when the bubble bursts, which it's going to, everyone keeps telling me it's going to burst, what are you going to do with yourself? So it was about keeping as many doors open as possible.
Ben, truly remarkable to be able to have played on, for so long after the doctor said, it's kind of almost all over sort of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to do that? Because clearly that must have been a big mental barrier to begin with that you had to break through. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you were able to achieve?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest issue with injuries is you can deal with disappointments that are almost your own fault and problems in your life that are your own fault. But the hard ones to deal with are when you've got absolutely no control over the situation. And all my injuries through my career, I badly injured my ankle in an England game, came down from a line out and landed on someone's foot from however high up you are, 12 foot or whatever. There's nothing you can do about that. It's just a freak accident. I never had an injury that I could say, my technique was wrong there, that's what caused the injury. It was always sort of taken away from you. And I think that is the problem that all players face. And it's something in life, really. You can either think, God, isn't life unfair? Or you can spend a couple of days moping about it and then dust yourself off and go, right, I'm going to come back even stronger and even better. And I just had to learn how to manage this knee injury. And, there were times where, the other players during training might say, "Corey, you're a bit heavy to lift today," and things. And I was struggling with my knee, but I just found a way to get through things. I changed my jumping style actually in the line out, which, funnily enough, actually made me a better line out jumper. That was the key area of my game. But because my knee wasn't so good, a lot of my jumping came through my calves, which meant I was quicker off the floor. So I might not have been the most athletic jumper. If you'd asked me to jump alongside one of the others, I probably wouldn't have gone high. But I was getting off the floor quicker, which meant I was easier to be lift quicker, and I was in and up before the other guy was there. So, just finding positives in things that you've had to adapt, which was a negative, and spinning them on their head, really.
Love that, the gift of a setback, because it forces a reappraisal. There's a great question coming from William. We'll get to that in a moment, but I just want to read out a couple of comments in the chat box. Please keep the questions and comments coming. So great commentating, a man of many talents. Ex-rugby stars are absolute gentlemen, like Paul Wallace and Lawrence Dallaglio and Ben, of course. So lovely questions. The questions I'm dying to ask is, what was it like to lift the Rugby World Cup?
Joe, it's the funniest period, because for 4 years it's all you've ever dreamed of doing, and probably the thing that gives me most pride looking back on it, or the warmest feeling, is not what you see of us celebrating together. It's those quiet moments of what we had to go through together that no one else will ever realize, and that's a really special bond that you see the guys that were involved in the squad. You might even just see them across a room in a function, and it's just that sort of glance across each other and that knowing nod of what you went through together. So we've got a huge bond because of that. But when you actually achieve it's just the next thing. What am I going to do next? And that was really, really strange. Because rugby has a challenge with so many different stakeholders as well. I won the World Cup final in Sydney on Saturday. We obviously had a couple of drinks to celebrate. But then I was playing for Leicester at Welford Road the following Saturday with Dean Richards as our boss, who wasn't the most forgiving and wasn't going to say, "Oh, well done, have a couple of weeks off." He needed us, so we went straight back. And it was literally land and get your head back onto the next job and the next thing you're going for. And I think, sport's very like that. What you're chasing is so important until you actually achieve it. And then it's right, what can we do next? And I think it's only when you sort of finish playing that you look back on those elements and really enjoy it. And so I guess the thing for me, the thing that I enjoyed most about 2003 was the journey to get there and everything that was involved. And probably the most special time actually was not lifting the trophy outside and cheering with the fans, though obviously we were hugely appreciative of their input into our victory. But it was closing the changing room door, a bit of quiet sort of coming in, a sheer relief, because we knew that we were the best team and we'd achieved what we wanted to do. But then it was the realization that as a group of 30 guys, we weren't going to be together again, because a few of the guys had retired. Some of us wouldn't be involved next time. So it was just that, shut the changing room door. And I can remember thinking, I don't really want this hour or so to end, because that's sort of the end of this chapter. And then I know as soon as we go out through that door, we'll be thinking about what we're doing next week.
I mean, it's amazing to get some insight into perhaps what goes through, your minds and perhaps your players' minds at that time. In professional sport, it's probably the most pressurized environment that you can find, with loads of different stakeholders, probably, in your mind, in your ear the whole time. So how do you go about dealing with those massive pressures, whether that's the commercial pressures that perhaps are floating through your mind, the fans, the press, your teammates? How do you kind of are able to equate all of those various things and still compete at that level?
I think that the team unit is very important, and the teams that deal with all those things that you've just talked about are very tight and have a clear understanding of how they're going to go about doing that. I think one of Clive Woodward's major strengths was his ability to to build that system that was resilient. His favorite acronym is TCUP, think correctly under pressure, and making sure that you train for that. We work with quite a lot with the Royal Marines and the Special Boat Service during my time with England, and obviously they do it to a level that's far greater than we do, and the stakes are much higher for them. But we stole a lot of stuff off them. So one of the things we stole was train hard, fight easy. So in training, try and make it harder than it's ever going to be in a game, and overload the players so that actually when you get out into a match situation, you're comfortable. I think trust is very important as well, and that's not just trusting each other, but trusting yourself that you've done absolutely everything you can to be as good a player as you can be, and that you're going to make the right decision at the right time. Also trusting the system, because as we mentioned before about the danger of hesitation, you can be the most team-worthy person in the world, but if you've got a nagging doubt about a call that's just been made or something that you've done, you will hesitate, because that will just subconsciously play on your mind just before you do it. So you have to have an environment where people feel that they can speak up at any time if they don't 100% agree with anything. And then you get the benefit that actually, even if 29 other guys are saying, well, this is why we agree with it, it's likely to allay those fears of you and make you perform better when you're asked to do it. So I think those two things are massive. And then obviously the adaptability side and knowing, but that comes from training hard and fighting easy, that you become better at adapting the more you're put in a situation where you have to.
Ben, what a lovely saying, train hard, fight easy. I mean, absolutely just resonant in my mind. So that's
I think the other one that we stole from the Marines, which is brilliant and absolutely right in terms of the adaptability side, is the best battle plan in the world never survives the first contact with the enemy. So as soon as that first bullet flies, something will change. And from their perspective, the team that reacts the quickest survives and lives, and the team that doesn't dies. And it's that important for them. So, yeah, that brutal acceptance where you might have invested so much into your plan of what you're going to do. I think there's another quote from Mike Tyson, isn't there? Everyone's got a plan of how they're going to beat me till they get hit in the mouth. And it is thinking on your feet and being able to react quickly.
Love it.
Yeah. So Ben, you reminded me of the Tyson quote before but then you said it. You also reminded me of when McGeechan said in '97 about the importance of that look, and how that look would be important on the field, but then decades after, and even saying it, the hairs on the back of my neck. So there is this whole culture around rugby, and I'm very interested to see how you've translated that into business. I've got one final rugby question, because then we'll move on, because there's so much more to you than your playing career, and then we'll flip it. So very straightforward question: who was the most physical player you ever came up against? And maybe, I suppose, again, sort of how did you deal with that when maybe somebody is bigger or stronger than you?
See, you often get asked who is your toughest opponent. So for me, as a big guy, I never really worried that there might have been people that could outmuscle me, but I knew I could sort of stay in the fight, and I knew I could throw my own shots. The people that scared me on the rugby pitch were the smallest people: Shane Williams, Jason Robinson. Because I knew one-on-one that they could, not only were they exceptionally nimble, but they were powerful and had a low center of gravity. So they were the people that really worried me. In terms of the toughest player, I was lucky to play with Martin Johnson, who's one of the toughest individuals mentally you'll ever meet. But I think the toughest player, and if you ask me who the greatest player of my generation was, it was Richie McCaw. Because he was the toughest. Anyone could do anything to him, and it wouldn't put him off his game at all. He would take every shot. He wouldn't be throwing punches, or he's not that sort of tough player, and that's not tough, is it really? But in terms of being able to be physically tough, he was absolutely the man. probably the person I had a decent battle with on the field was Bakis Bota, who was another second row. And he wasn't afraid of showing his throwing his Africana muscle around a bit. But again, I always felt quite comfortable in those situations. It's when you're out of your comfort zone against someone that's got skills that are far superior of yours, and you get isolated. And that's the joy of rugby, I think. You have these matchups in the most physical sport you can get between a guy that's sort of 5'5" and half the weight of the other guy, and the smaller guy comes out on top.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. It's David and Goliath thing, isn't it? You don't want to be made look a fool by the quick-footed winger kind of thing.
Exactly.
Sammy Bell, who the question came from, he suggested Bakis Bota, so you were on the money there, Sammy. I just want to briefly dip into your commentating career, and just to flatter you a bit. Obviously, you won a BAFTA for the Rugby World Cup. Commentary, so
on my own.
Not on your own, but again, I suspect everything you've done has been in collaboration and from teamwork. But just so, what's it like being poacher turned gamekeeper? You like, there must be some frustrations, but also obviously being connected to the game still. So what's the balance of being a commentator versus a player?
I don't think there are many negatives, to be honest. It's you're still, as you said, you're still connected and involved with something that you have a huge passion for. You can get up on a Sunday morning and walk around without feeling the effects of it. But look, you'll never replace the high of running out of Twickenham for England and the crowd noise and everything else. But it's pretty close. Live TV, you get that adrenaline. I think it's something that I would have always dreamed of doing, but never thought you could have had the possibility, because there's so limited numbers of people that can go into it. And I've really enjoyed the challenge of learning the skill of it. I was very lucky during my commentary, all the way through my commentary career. Really, I've worked with Nick Mullins, who far and away for me the best sports commentator. And from day one, he gave me some great pearls of advice. So one was that it just forget about who you're talking to, but imagine that on one side of your microphone's Martin Johnson, who knows everything about the sport, and on the other side is your mum, who thinks she knows a bit about the sport, but actually doesn't really know very much. And just try and keep both of them involved in a conversation with each other, and you won't go too far wrong. And that's great. There are some challenges as an ex-player. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it, I felt when I was playing that some of the commentators were really negative. And I used to be a huge rugby league fan as well growing up. So I'd watch the Sky Sports Rugby League, slightly smaller sport, so they were constantly trying to big up their sport, and I felt that rugby was a little bit negative in its analysis, because Joe, what I think it is, I think when you've been a player, you're so used to criticizing your own performance and thinking about what went wrong. That's what you focus on, and you've got to balance that and say, look, these are the mistakes, but how you've got to actually appeal to what's the exciting part of the game. And the other thing that I sort of had to learn as well was, particularly when you're out of vision as a commentator, imparting that excitement in your voice. The first couple of times you do it, you feel really embarrassed and self-conscious because you're getting overly excited about something. But if you don't do it, no one can see your hands. They're not moving around like you might be if you're in vision. They can't see your face to see whether that's lit up. So you have to go over the top when you're describing the greatest try you've ever seen. And that would be the other bit of advice I'd give to anyone that was going into it. Make sure that the tone of your voice reflects the pictures that the people are seeing.
That's super great advice there, Ben. And I want to pick up on a point that you talked about in relation to taking a step back. And it's actually a question that's come through from Ben Somerset. And he talks about, in fact, perhaps we may not appreciate the amount of sort of reflection that you do as a professional player. But of course, in business, we are constantly reflecting and kind of thinking about how we could do things better the second time around. So what impact do you think that reflection has had, both as you as a professional player, as well as perhaps in your role at Pablo?
I think one of the things that everyone sort of struggles with, that has the mindset that they constantly want to better themselves or better their agency or better their sports team, is that you never actually celebrate the victories. you're constantly thinking of the next thing. A little bit like I talked about with the World Cup. Clive Woodward was always quite big on the fact that you celebrate little victories, because otherwise you don't get through. So, Gareth Mercer, the founder at Pablo, he's very much it's never good enough. We've always got to get better. But he's worked particularly hard during this pandemic, but at celebrating those little victories as well, realizing that actually, if you're constantly pushing people and you never actually celebrate, that the ambition to go for the next one is not heightened as much as it could be, because you don't sort of get those highs, because as soon as you reach the peak, suddenly it's right, what are we going to do next that's better, or how can we make it better? So getting that balance right, I think, is really important. I think the balance of the team as well, making sure that you've got people, a really diverse set of people that, you might have someone that's constantly striving, but you also might have one of the other partners, Pete, that's very good with his emotional intelligence and making sure that he's got a feel for the agency, and having that balance, particularly in the management team, is really, really important.
So Ben, the move from rugby to rugby commentary is, for some, a well tested, tried and tested path. The flip from rugby into setting up an advertising agency, probably less common. So tell us about the story of how that came to be.
Well, I mentioned about my knee injury and constantly looking what I was going to do. Just before I turned fully professional, so I was semi-pro, I went to university, did a sports degree really at Loughborough, but it was sport and business, and I majored on the marketing side. So very early on, once I joined Leicester, Gareth came to do a photo shoot with me while he was at another agency for one of the sponsors. Got speaking to him, said to him that was what what he was doing was what I was interested in doing when I finish. Can I follow you around for a bit? Went and followed him around. The Hewlett Packard was the brand that we were doing some photos for, and at the time I was a bit of a geek that bought Stuff magazine every month when it came out, and Gareth wasn't the most technically minded, so we actually were bouncing off each other, and he suggested that I had a bit of an aptitude for it, and then he went off and set up his own agency, and I thought, can I jump in with you? And on my days off, I'll come and learn the business. And then we grew from there. And the plan was always to, when I finished, go in full time and do it. And then I got offered the TV role, and we had a chat. Gareth's been unbelievable for me in terms of taking up the slack, because one thing that I am short of is time, and we just made the decision that the benefits of being on TV were quite strong in terms of keeping the profile up, other opportunities that might arise. So we thought we'll find a way to make it work, and I feel hugely fortunate that I found someone as adaptable as Gareth and Pete and everyone else that's come into the agency since, to allow me to pursue passions in a couple of different areas.
Ben, it feels like, for a number of years, even before you were sort of finished with your professional rugby career, that you were looking to the next thing, and of course starting to scope out what that could look like. And it feels like you very much found home in that. But I'm sure a lot of other players probably doing that same reflection perhaps at that time, or even as the end of that professional career. I mean, how does that impact on your mental health or their mental health? Because clearly you were very clear about what you wanted, but maybe others wouldn't have been. And how does that impact you mentally?
There's a huge problem, and I think it'll only get. We were quite lucky in my generation that we'd sort of still been at the time where people would maybe try and combine playing as a youth and going to university, or thinking about what they might do. Some people might have had jobs before they started playing, and I think the guys at the moment find it really difficult. And one of the reasons, and even I was so lucky, I had everything, so many things in place, but I still had a real fear of stopping playing. And I think a lot of players have that, the fear of the unknown of not being a rugby player anymore. And yeah, when you're a sports person, it's quite similar to the military actually, in that it almost becomes your identity. So a lot of players struggle when they first retire because they feel like part of them has died. Their identity's gone. They've probably since the age of 10 been that big kid that plays rugby, and suddenly they're not. And you're going from probably being at the pinnacle to not being at the pinnacle anymore, and you've got to build yourself back up. So I think a few players bury their heads in the sand and don't want to think about it, and that makes it even worse because it's somewhere at the back of their mind. It's there nagging that one day this is all going to come to an end. And I say to any player I speak to, just you are very fortunate to meet a lot of people. So open every door, just have a look through every door, see if there's something, and build that network, and then it will help you enormously in terms of your mental well-being in the last couple of years of your career. And then it's that thing again, that lack of fear, because you'll be all right. Just when it all ends, you'll find something else. You don't have to find it in the first year. It could take 2-3 years, but you'll get through it. And then suddenly the skills that you already have that you've been developed with will become a huge part of your life in the future. But I think mentally, coming to the end of that career is really challenging for players. And I'm talking a little bit from a hypocritical stance in that I was very lucky with the opportunities that I had to go into, and some people don't have that, but equally they'll get through it and they'll come out of it stronger as a result.
And I just say that, what fantastic advice, even for people going through this sort of transition period right now in this moment. I mean, it's just, I'm sure it certainly strikes a chord with me and with what's happening here. So really nice.
I think so, and there will be opportunities in the future as a result of this pandemic. A lot of the industries that are struggling now, and sport is massively one of them. I'm a non-exec at Leicester Tigers in the Premiership, and Premiership rugby with no crowds and a huge cost base of players is really, really struggling. Having said that, I think they will get the benefit once things open up again, because what this pandemic has really shown us is what's important to us in our life and the things that we really miss. And I think, sport will benefit because people have really realized when they've had their sport taken away how important it is to some people. I think the hospitality industry is another one that will get the bounce back because, God, we're all sick of having a glass of wine over Zoom and we want to get out and socialize together. It's just whether you can ride this period and whether you will get the opportunity, but the industry will recover.
Yeah, great messages, Ben. You'll be all right, we'll be all right. And also on the mental health, many people, mental health is a continuum, isn't it? And we all have ups and downs, but hopefully for players of the future, it's a more open conversation. Now, I'm going to say out loud, because you are very humble, but your transfer into advertising agency is remarkable in that I think Pablo probably the most successful independent advertising agency of the last few years. So you've led in multiple environments, and you'll have been exposed to many, many leaders. So I guess the simple question is, what is good leadership? What does good leadership mean to you?
So one thing I did learn from my rugby career is that leadership and management are very different. And probably Clive Woodward's team was where I learned it the best, because he was huge on creating leadership right throughout the organization. And that's something that's really, really important to me. So to give you an example, the management sort of focusing on, as a sports team, focusing on tactics and the general direction of the team and where we want to get to. But if they're constantly having to look at all the minute detail and worry about it, then their capacity and their resources taken away from that. So Clive was really good about trusting people to run areas of the game and make them better than he could if he was having to worry about it. So an example would be one of the things we all came up with as a group in terms of developing that trust and almost conning ourselves was that we always wanted to look like a team. So we all wore the same kit, all the players wore the same kit, all the coaches wore the same kit for every. It sounds like a really minor thing, and I guess it was a little bit, but just develop that we're one unit. So if Clive Woodward, we had a kit man, former Royal Marine, absolutely brilliant. Everything he did, he just wanted to be the best kit man that he could be. He didn't want to be involved in tactics. He didn't want to sort of talk to the player. All he wanted to do was make sure that he did his job to the best of his ability. And if Clive Woodward comes down to training wearing the wrong tracksuit bottoms, he'd go up to the boss, his overall boss, and say, "You've got the wrong tracksuit bottoms on, go back to your room and change." And that was his element of detail that he thought was important to us winning the World Cup. And he was leading that and driving it. And there was someone doing that for every area throughout the team. So really the kit man's the sort of lowest position, if you like. It's not the person that's going to be on TV giving the interviews, but he had the ability to go to the absolute top of the organization and say, "You've done something wrong, go and sort it out now before we start training." And yeah, that sort of leadership from the bottom up means that everyone is on the same page in trying to make every single detail as good as it can be for the whole organization.
So fascinating. Sorry, Richie, fascinating. Federated leadership. How do you translate that into Pablo? Because that's no easy thing to do.
It's not, particularly at the moment. I think, with so much happening remotely, it's quite difficult, and that's an element. I think, obviously we always want to be better at everything. That's an area that we'll continue to work on. But it is empowering people to think that they have a voice, and encouraging people to find things that they're frustrated with. And you talked about the no. I think the New Zealanders call it the no dickheads policy, and that ability to have people that Richie McCaw, the captain, sweeping the changing rooms so you leave the changing rooms in a good environment. But there's a danger. Clive had a saying that no energy sappers. So an energy sapper is the guy that thinks there's something wrong in the organization, but never actually says it out loud. Will just whinge to a couple of other players and drag their energy out of it and sort of say, "Oh, God, they're making us do this again." That sort of environment. If you've got a problem with it, say it in the environment or get it back to the coaches somehow. So I think, from a Pablo perspective, if there's something that we can do better, we're open to hearing about it. And there's probably things in the environment that we're not doing to the best of our ability, but we haven't seen it. So you be the person to lead it, and you be the person to really drive us on by taking over something and shifting it to the next level.
That sounds super there, Ben, and some really great insights and advice about great leadership. We've got so many really lovely comments coming through that I want to kind of pick up on a couple of them. And then there are a couple of questions which I'm going to try and club together because we're going to run short of time otherwise. So first comment by Stephen Kelly. He says, going to Twickenham or the Aviva and watching a game again with crowds will become an event and experience. We're going to value so much more in the future. So really talking to your point about this will swing back in. Yeah. Wendy, lovely question there. So she asks about how did you keep your confidence as you changed your career and in that sense? Another question from Tom Hills. Tom, lovely to see you here as well, by the way. And he talks about a lot about the cancellation of 2020-2021 leagues below level 2. It's been a big blow. So from a business perspective, what could rugby clubs do to maintain the momentum, interest, and ultimately revenue? And then final question is from Shem Bavi. And they talk about that how is it important for some team players to also have an individual indoor-outdoor sport to give them time to reflect as well? So a few things, a few different areas to comment on.
Yeah. So firstly, I'll take the lower leagues one first. Look, it is really, really difficult. Again, I think the community spirit and people's realization of how important their local club is to them is hugely important. Certainly, what we're seeing for Leicester Tigers is we've just had our best ever sponsorship year because people, I think, have invested in us because they know the importance to the national psyche of sport, and they realise that actually now's the time to support clubs. So I think the public will support the clubs. The big issue, which the RFU are working really hard on at the moment, particularly for a sport like rugby, which is both on and off the field, one of the hardest sports to socially distance, either would be that in the bar or tackling each other or in the scrum. So, but they're working really hard on that. And then I think there's a big piece that, not only those clubs themselves, but their MPs, anyone that from the community needs to be driving that message that actually, if you want these places to survive and be around, you need to go and support them. And as soon as you can safely go and support them, we have to get behind our sort of local sports clubs, because, again, the importance, not only physiologically and the whole fitness element and things, but mentally having that support network of your friends around a sports team that you can drop in and just sort of keep an eye on each other's well-being is hugely important. And I think there's going to be a massive, massive piece to do on supporting the local, as we, a lot of brands are involved, and Pablo are doing something for the SMEs, supporting them through this period so that they can prosper. And then they will get the benefit with people going out and supporting local. I think it's the same for sports teams as well. Absolutely agree that the sort of atmosphere at Twickenham is going to be hugely important as well. And what an atmosphere that is going to be to walk into afterwards. I'm trying to think what the other questions were. Sorry.
Keeping your confidence as you pivot careers. That's
a big one. So the biggest thing, the two areas that I struggled with, firstly, time, and particularly coming from a sports background where actually your time's often managed for you very well by your coaches, and you have a pretty defined strategy. It's short and ultra intense, but you have to go in and stay focused for a much shorter time than you do in business. But managing that was the thing that I found most difficult. And the other thing is imposter syndrome. Going into a different industry when everyone knows that you're from a sporting background, you will probably get more opportunities to speak to people, but it's having that confidence that you know what you are talking about and being able to portray that. I think if you do come from a different background, people are willing, you almost get that dislocated expectations if you actually do know what you're talking about, and people will go, oh, you're not just a rugby player and been pushed up here to sort of be a face of the agency. So I think that's really important as well. But focus on what you can bring and the skills that you have, because there are so many skills that are transferable from sport.
And the last question from Shambhavi, I think, was more about how do you actually play leisure sport when you were doing your professional sport, just to kind of give yourself that more something different but a reflective time?
No, only because there's an old sort of, for any non-rugby fans, there's always a battle between the two sets of positions. You've got the forwards and the backs, and the forwards will tell you they're the ones that work hard, and the backs will tell you that they're the ones that score all the tries and actually make the difference. So they're the piano pushers and the piano players. And we were always so tired, but we had to sort of devote as much energy and keep as much energy in recovery to being able to turn up to training the next day. The backs might go out and play the odd game of golf and have coffee with each other and enjoy each other's company, but we didn't quite have that luxury. But one of the things I was most looking forward to, I don't still play rugby. If you gave me the opportunity now of a game of rugby or a game of football, I'd choose football, because I gave up all those things to concentrate on rugby. And I don't feel that I'd reach the same heights. I wouldn't get the same enjoyment out of rugby now, having been at that peak. I've played a few charity games with other ex-players, and it was good fun. But I'd like to sort of do all the other sports that I really enjoyed as a kid, that actually made me much better rugby player, because I'd tried lots of different sports when I was younger. I prefer to do those now than go out and have a game of rugby.
Ben, the time has just disappeared. Could talk for hours, but unfortunately time is up. So all that remains is to say a massive thank you. So many good messages for people listening in.
Thanks,
Your innate positivity, your humility, and the messages around don't hesitate and your adaptability. And I love the, we'll be all right, you'll be all right. So thank you enormously. You've had a fantastic career already, and congratulations on that. But I'm sure there's so much more to come, and excited to see that. But for now, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. I do a lot of podcasts and things, and I've got to say this has been one of the most enjoyable. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
There you go. We'll slip you the 20 quid later. But thanks again, man. And also from Richie, just for everybody, for next week, we've got Pete Markey on, very experienced marketer, particularly financial services. He's won 4 separate Marketer of the Year awards. So he's got a lot to say. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. But for now, Ben, fantastic to have you on. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, and good luck with everything that's to follow.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.